Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Ben Vicarage. May I wish you a very, very happy new year. I hope you are well and cheerful. I hope you had a lovely Christmas period. May I thank you all, my wonderful colleagues who did some fascinating reflection of the Christmas period too, all about the birth of Jesus and so on. So thank you to you, and thank you for watching, and I hope you found those helpful. Today, my friends, as we begin this new year, in the words of, I forget which comedian used to say, and now for something completely different. We've had a few months, we were looking at Genesis and Exodus. Now we're going to look at a book which is completely different. It's the book of Proverbs. I have to say, it's not a book I know well. I've started dabbling into it, as you'd expect, with you doing these talks, and I'm learning a lot very fast. So without further ado, let's get stuck in. Proverbs and chapter 1. Here goes. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. For learning about wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight, for gaining instruction in wise dealing, righteousness, justice, and equity, to teach shrewdness to the simple, knowledge and prudence to the young. Let the wise also hear and gain in learning, and the discerning acquire skill, to understand a proverb and a figure, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Hear, my child, your father's instruction, and do not reject your mother's teaching, for they are a fair garland for your head and pendants for your neck. My child, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, let's lie in wait for blood. Let us wantonly ambush the innocent. Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive, and whole like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all kinds of costly things, and fill our houses with booty. Throw in your lot among us, and we shall all have one purse. My child, do not walk in their way. Keep your foot from their paths. For their feet run to evil, and their hurry to shed blood. For in vain is the net baited, while the bird is looking on. Yet they lie in wait to kill themselves, and set an ambush for their own lives. Such is the end of all who are greedy for gain. It takes away the life of its possessors. Wisdom cries out in the street, and in the squares she raises her voice. At the busiest corner she cries out. At the entrance of the city gates she speaks. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing, and fools hate knowledge? Give heed to my reproof. I will pour out my thoughts to you. I will make my words known to you, because I have called and you refused, have stretched out my hand and no one heeded, and because you've ignored all my counsel and would have none of my reproof. I will also laugh at your calamity. I will mock when panic strikes you. When panic strikes you like a storm, and your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you, then they will call upon me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but will not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord, would have none of my counsel, and despised all my reproof. Therefore they shall eat the fruit of their way, and be sated with their own devices. For waywardness kills the simple, and the complacency of fools destroys them. But those who listen to me will be secure, and will live at ease without dread of disaster. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, friends, let's just put this chapter into what we call bite-sized, manageable chunks. I always find it helps when trying to understand what the Bible says. So this is Proverbs chapter 1. Verse 1 is like an introduction. Verse 2 to 6 kind of gives you some of the advantages of why wisdom is such a good thing, and some of the benefits of it. Verse 7 is just amazing. Verses 8 to 19 are about to be honest, trying to get the young to avoid gang violence, basically. And then verse 20 to the end is all about wisdom acting like almost like a town crier, crying out in the streets. So they're the kind of the sections of it. Let's take it a bit at a time. Firstly, verse 1. Which is kind of a introduction to it all. What does this tell us? Firstly, it tells that these are proverbs. Now, the Hebrew word proverb, in its literal sense, means a comparison. So, such and such is like such and such, and to do such is like this, and so on and so on. There's like a comparison or like a simile. That's what it really means. So a comparison in literally, I mean, a proverb literally, the Hebrew word means a comparison. So such and such is like when such and such that. It's that kind of thing, okay? But over the years, the word got widened, and it became basically a sort of word for wise sayings in their broadest sense. So a proverb here, it's like wise sayings. So here we are. We've got the wise sayings of Solomon, and most of the proverbs in the book of Proverbs are from Solomon. Solomon was somebody who was known to be a tremendously wise king. He was David's son, and in 1 Kings 4:29 to 34 describes something of Solomon's amazing wisdom and the story of how he acquired that wisdom. Okay, so here you've got the Proverbs are basically wise sayings by a guy called Solomon, who was the king after David. Interesting enough, a king who started off very well, but like leaving a piece of meat on the side, got more and more rancid with time, to be honest, and started off well, but went bad. In a sense, you could have perhaps listened to some of listen to his own wisdom here. But essentially, as I say, you've got the Proverbs these are wise sayings, mostly, but not all, by Solomon, one of the wisest people who ever lived. Okay. Now, where does it put the book of Proverbs itself? There's one Proverbs here. Essentially, the Old Testament fits into kind of 4 categories. There is Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, which is what was generally thought of as being law. We did lots of that last week. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, what's called the Torah, the law. Then there's history books, which comes from Joshua through to 2 Chronicles and Nehemiah and Ezra and so on. So they're all about the history of God's people. Then you've got prophecy, which are people like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, and so on and so on. And you've got wisdom. So, and there's 3 or 4 other books chucked in there as well. But essentially, you've got 4 categories. And Proverbs fits into the wisdom category. Now, it's interesting, actually, because prophecy tends to be big picture stuff. It's getting my people to turn to me. It's that kind of stuff. So prophecy, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and so on, tend to be big, broad sweep stuff, talking from God to his people. Proverbs and wisdom tends to be more to do with the individual. So Proverbs essentially are things that can be taken to heart by individual believers, if you like. Okay. So whereas prophecy tends to be broad sweep stuff, Proverbs tends to be more individual. Okay. So we have the book of Proverbs. They're written by Solomon, the son of David, a very, very wise man. They are wise sayings, and they're written more generally speaking, more to the individual. So there are things that we can listen to here. So that's verse 1. Verse 2 to 6 are about the advantages of wisdom, all about wisdom and the advantages of it. For having wisdom, it is a hymn to wisdom, if you like. It helps us to understand things. We get to understand righteousness, justice, and equity, and also acquire wisdom. You get more wisdom as well. So the more wisdom you get, the more you get. To he or she who has, more will be given. To he who has not, what they have will be taken away. To Jesus. And I think, in a sense, it's a pretty good example of this here. So wisdom, in verses 2 to 6, it's all about why wisdom is such a good thing. What you acquire skill, knowledge, and understanding from it. That's verses 2 to 6. Verse 7 is classic, and verse 7, I think, sums up the end. So if you had to have one verse, if you take it from the whole book, it would be this one. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And when it says the beginning, it doesn't mean as in time, the beginning of it. It really means like the beginning, like the source of it. So the source of the fear of the Lord is the source of knowledge. If you want knowledge or wisdom, the source of it is to fear the Lord. And fearing the Lord doesn't mean being terrified of God. It means holding God in proper respect. So if you want to have good knowledge and good wisdom, the way to do it, the source of it is the fear of the Lord. And to this day, I would argue, the people who are wisest in this world are the people who fear the Lord. Then in verses 8 to 19, then you have the writer is writing to young people, and essentially he's saying, don't let the crowd drag you along. That people will come along and tempt you away. There will be people who will tempt you to violence and so on. But he's essentially saying, don't do it. You know, if you like, and he talks a bit like a wise father talking to their son, or a wise mother talking to their child, or whatever. He's saying, you know, people will tempt you to come along. People will tempt you to cut corners. People will tempt you to be dishonest. People will tempt you to be honest, but don't do it. Follow what God says, because it will ultimately, you know, he who as the old phrase, he who diggeth a pit shall fall therein. You know, if people that do this thing, it may seem tempting, but don't do it, because ultimately it's a trap for themselves. Then in verse 20 to the end of the chapter, you have what's interesting here, because there's another hymn to wisdom. But what's quite interesting, he talks about wisdom like crying out in the street, and that in a sense the world is clamoring around and things are happening, and trading's taking place and people are going about their lives, and many people are foolish. But what he's saying is that the voice of wisdom still cries out. And I want to say the same is true today, actually, that the world is going about its business, but actually, and much of it is very unwise, but wisdom still cries out in the street. And it's interesting, actually, because the wisdom is so important here. It's almost personified as well. That it isn't just the voice of. It's almost like wisdom's like talking like a person, really. That crying out in the street, and that, you know, people are carrying out their business and doing what they do, and so on. And much of it is foolish, but wisdom still cries out. And the same is true today. You know, that's you know, the voice of God still cries out in the street. The voice of wisdom is still there. And that many people are acting foolishly, of course they are, as they always have done. But throughout this time, the voice of wisdom, the voice of God, still cries out in the street. So you've got the sections here. Verse 1 is like an introduction. Then verse 2 to 6 is about exposing why the benefits of being wise. Verse 7 is talking about where true wisdom and knowledge comes from. It comes from fear of the Lord. And the wisest people today are still those who honour God to this day. Then you've got verses 8 to 19, words to the young. You know, you'll be tempted away, but don't do it. You know, because ultimately, people that cut corners, people that act dishonestly, people that act violently, it'll come back on them in the end. And then verses 20 to the end is that, if you like, the voice of wisdom is still crying out. The people are crying out. People are carrying out their business, much of which is unwise. But what the guy is saying here is that, you know, the voice of wisdom still cries out in the street. So, my friends, I hope you find that helpful. Lots more tomorrow. On Monday. Have a lovely weekend. Thank you for watching. Do share this message with your friends, and let's get stuck into the Proverbs. Let's find out what